I don't know what part of the world you are at, but I thought this would be a good message to communicate to everybody. And it is just my journey with the COVID-19, or sometimes what people popularly call it coronavirus. Now, my journey started on the 7th of March, 2020. And for the first 3 or 4 days, I would get a very, very high temperature at night. But come morning, as I take a cold shower, uh, unknowingly, I would cool my temperature and I'd go about my business like I would. This week, starting on the 8th of March, which was a Sunday, it was going to be a very, very busy week for me. I had school. I had an installment of some wardrobes. I had been invited to a parliamentary meeting at Westminster. Then I had a crisis game as part of the university work. So it was going to be a very, very crammed week. Uh, I might flit in back and forth, but I hope you'll stick with me and just listen to what I have to say. So for the first 3 or 4 days, my temperature would be very high at night and then it would settle down. On the Wednesday, which was 11th of March, that is when I made my journey to London. Prior to that, I was sat in the house waiting for the installment of the wardrobes. And then also I had a lecture over the internet. So I did that simultaneously. When I finished, the installation came, and then at about 1 o'clock, everything was finished. I tidied up and made my journey to London. All this time, I was having communication with the coordinator of the meeting. And I said to her, let me know, because by that time we had started having rumors about coronavirus spreading and coming to our region of the world. So I made the journey from West Yorkshire in a tiny village called Slowett, as the locals will call it. Otherwise, other people will call it Slathwaite. And it's about a 3 hour drive into London. I got to London at about 5 o'clock, sat in the car as I had gotten a call from my sister from abroad, spoke to her for about an hour and a half. When I then looked at my email, there's an email from this coordinator for the parliamentary meeting, which indicated that the meeting had been cancelled, unfortunately. So I was already in London and I decided I would spend the night and then come back the next day. So my friend always leaves me a key to her house. I let myself into her house, waited. Her husband came, her son and grandson later joined. Her nephew came, and also a friend of the nephew, whom they're taking a PhD discipline together. So we had an interesting evening just talking to one another, but I could start to feel that I wasn't quite right, and my temperature just kept on rising and rising. So at about 9:30, my friend came in from what she was doing during the day. And when she gave me a hug, she did mention that my body felt very, very warm. And I did say, yes, I've been not feeling too good in the last 4 or 5 days by now, but I'll soldier on. So we had something to eat. We went to bed. In the middle of the night, she says she was woken up because my body was very, very hot. But I kept drinking, kept drinking, kept drinking. Come morning, I took a cold shower, had breakfast with her husband. My friend had already left for the day. And then I proceeded to come back to West Yorkshire. Took me another 3 hours. Now, I normally have scheduled blood tests every 3 months or so. So I had my blood forms with me. And when I got back to Huddersfield, I decided to go to the hospital, to the phlebotomist, and get the blood test done, and then come back and rest at home because I was starting now to shake. Although it was a beautiful spring day outside, my body still felt a bit cold, although the temperature was high. So I put on a winter coat, which was in the car, went into the hospital, and I asked to speak to the supervisor. When the supervisor came, I did explain to her I have a scheduled blood test, but unfortunately, my temperature is a bit higher than normal. She scolded me and said, "You shouldn't be here. You should be at home and calling 111." Now, in normal circumstances, I should have gone to the A&E and explained to them exactly how I was feeling. But when you're not feeling too right, I don't think your thinking is also right. So I proceeded to go away, came home, was even too unwell to put my overnight bag back upstairs, left it in the kitchen, and then called 111. When I called 111, I was advised to take some paracetamol, have plenty of fluids, and rest. I rested on the settee in my living room, and at night I managed to struggle, went into bed, but the temperature would not go away. Started taking the paracetamol every 4 hours, but before the 4 hours would be over, the temperature would come back and vigorously this time. And I have a very good friend called Ruth, who normally comes to share some Bible study with me, accompanied with a friend Zoe. Zoe had traveled to France to go on a skiing trip, but unfortunately, when they got to France, that is when the coronavirus had exploded, so everywhere was shut, and they waited for the time for them to come back home. So all this time between the Thursday evening and Saturday morning, my friend Ruth kept on coming to my house to ensure I had something to eat because I couldn't do anything that I would do normally. But this time I had vomiting and diarrhea, no appetite whatsoever, and the temperature just kept on rising and rising and rising. So on Saturday we called 111 again. They advised that I continue to take paracetamol and plenty of fluids and to rest. By Sunday morning, I was not right, and I kept telling my friend that I have never experienced something like this. I have suffered from malaria in the past. I've had the flu on 2 occasions, but nothing that I had experienced past in those two situations measured up to what I was feeling. And I kept saying, I feel awful. I feel awful. 5 years ago, I lost my sense of smell after a very big surgery. But then the thing I kept telling my friend Ruth is that I can smell death. I can smell death. And she would comment and say, "How does death smell like, Stella?" And I'd say, I can't explain it to you, but I do smell death. So she helped me, but this time I was a bit critical. Not a bit, I was critical. And Ruth called 111. I gave authority for her to speak on my behalf because by this time I could not, I was not coherent. So she did speak on my behalf, and an ambulance came. When the paramedics arrived at my house, they took my temperature. It recorded 38.4, but they decided it was not high enough to warrant hospitalization. So their suggestion was I should stay home, continue to take paracetamol. They told me not to cover myself, although I was very lightly covered, not to cover myself just to keep the temperature down and to turn off the heating, which I did. So they went away, but I didn't feel better. And when they took my other vitals, my heartbeat was irregular. That should have alerted them. They asked me for my medical history, which I did. It placed me in a very vulnerable category. But they thought if I went to hospital, it was the same routine that the hospital would take, and I would be better off staying at home. These are professionals. I had no reason to doubt or to try and argue or reason with them. I obeyed and stayed at home. My temperature did not go down. It kept on rising, 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 rising. By day 8, which was now another Wednesday, I felt a little bit of relief. I had a very good night. In the morning, I was almost back to myself. I took a shower. I put on some glad rags, and I proceeded into town. I drove myself into town and had a manicure and a pedicure. And I came back home. And I came back home on the Thursday. This was, I think, about the 11th day or so after I had first started feeling unwell. I then came home, but then I had a very, very rough night. It's like the fever had come back with a vengeance. I took paracetamol. I didn't feel any relief. Had a jug of very cold water beside my bed. I kept on taking this. My window was open. I threw away my duvet and just lay on the bed, but still I felt very, very poorly. So come morning, my friend Ruth came because I couldn't by this time again look after myself. I couldn't make myself even a cup of tea. Crawling to the bathroom was a real problem. So I gave myself a very quick wash, did not have the energy to change from my pajamas, and came downstairs very, very slowly. But by this time, I was starting to feel breathless, and I had developed a dry cough. Now, I decided that anytime I take paracetamol, it is just masking what the real problem is. And I was determined to stop taking the paracetamol and soldier on to see how high is the temperature going to go. And when it does go, I think it would give the paramedics a clear picture of how they are going to tackle how I was feeling. So come the Saturday evening, this is now on the 14th day that I had started feeling unwell. Now, you remember I started feeling unwell on the 7th of March. This was on the 21st of March. So I called 111 again. I had forgotten when the paramedics had visited 7 days before. They said I didn't need to go through 111. I would be escalated. So I needed to call 999, and I would be put in the front of the queue because they would have a record of visiting 7 days before. But common sense then goes out of the window. My friend Ruth helped me to call 111. But by this time, we had contacted my diabetic nurse, who was of the opinion I was starting to display the signs and symptoms of somebody with coronavirus. So her advice was that nobody should come near me. I should be isolated. But then that left me very, very vulnerable. I felt a little bit abandoned, even though my friend Ruth continued to assure me, call me on the phone, say, we have to follow the medical advice, but we have to stay at a distance. So I didn't know how I was going to help myself because by this time, I could not do anything for myself. So I spoke to a clinician, and I do suspect he was of African origin because of the accent. He was very cross in the sense that when my temperature had tested 38.47 days before, I think the guidelines was that I should have been admitted in hospital. So he queried to find out why I was not taken into hospital. And I explained to him that I was obeying what the medical professionals had suggested. and that they advised I should stay at home because there wasn't anything else the hospital could do for me. Then he said he had read, or he was looking through my medical history. He could see there were multiple underlying medical issues. He could tell that my breathing was labored at that particular point. Although the cough was dry, it was not persistent, and I was having shortness of breath even at rest. Just sitting down, I'd be breathless. Trying to change a position if I lay down was making me breathless. I would not go 2 steps without being breathless. So this became really, really unbearable. So he said their guidelines at that particular time when he was speaking to me, this is on the 21st March night, was that they would go to a person complaining that they have some medical complications. But then he said, it is pointless for me to come to you knowing that I will examine you, not give you any kind of treatment and leave you there. That will not sit well with me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to order an ambulance to come and bring you into hospital. I said that was okay. He asked me who I lived with. I said I lived on my own. So he told me the waiting period would be about 2 hours. This was at about 8 in the night, but the ambulance did not come until about 8 the next morning, which was on the 22nd of March. When the ambulance came, this time it was 2 female paramedics. The ones prior to that, 7 days before, were 2 male ones. They went on to take my temperature, and every time they put the thermometer in the ear, they said, oh, because you were laying on that side, let us take it on the other side. And when they put it on the other ear, the temperature would rise again. And they kept on alternating. The temperature kept on rising. And whenever I was asked how I was feeling, I said I felt awful. I felt awful because indeed this was nothing like I'd ever experienced in my life before. So they explained to me that they had been ordered to take me into hospital. So I had an aide, a walking aide. They told me to take my time walking into the ambulance, which was just parked outside my house, and then lay me on the stretcher. And we proceeded to go into hospital. It just seemed like a very, very long drive. I didn't know where I was going. Felt a little bit disoriented. But when we got there, I asked, what hospital is this? Because I needed to tell somebody at least where I was. Because by this time, nobody knew. Nobody knew where I was going or the progression of my illness. So we got into hospital. I was wheeled into a room which had no ventilation whatsoever. I was left there. One of the paramedics stood there, and until the doctor came, then she handed over to the doctor, and she said there was a bit of a temperature inconsistency. It kept on rising every few minutes, and that also my heartbeat was tacky, which meant that it was irregular and it wasn't pleasing to the readings that they would normally be satisfied with. So the paramedic left me in the care of the doctor. Doctor came, I was given a mask. I had been given this mask from home. So the doctor came. The mask did not help at all because it doesn't have ventilation. And anytime you're breathing out, the same air comes back in. So it is as if you're making your situation worse. If you've got a breathing problem, it makes sense if you're not on oxygen to be able to breathe out and expel that air. So I felt as if it was suffocating me. So at periods of time, I would just move the mask just to be able to breathe in some air and be able to exhale without having to be muzzled by this mask on my mouth and part of my nose. So the doctor came in. She asked me how I was feeling. She asked me if I had had contact with anybody from abroad. I said not knowingly. So took my vitals again. And then after some time, which seemed like a long, long time, two radiologists came into the room with an X-ray machine, asked me to remove a chain that I have around my neck. I went on to remove that with very great difficulty, and they went on to do a chest X-ray. And after what seemed to be a long, long time, two doctors then came into the room. And when they did, I could read from their faces that they did not have very pleasing news for me. But I soldiered on and listened to what they had to say. So the doctor who had examined me at first said, "We've looked at your X-ray, and unfortunately, you have pneumonia. So what we are going to do, we're going to discharge you with antibiotics. Who is going to come and take you home?" And I said, "Doctor, I live on my own." By this time, the government guidelines were very specific. If somebody lived on their own, if they had underlying medical issues, there would have been a discharge care plan so that there was a medical follow-up when they went home. But at this time, I don't think they were very concerned about that. I think it was just about checking out numbers. And they specifically told me that they were not going to test for coronavirus. It was a bit of a surprise for me, knowing very well that the virus had gone really, really wide. So the most common thing, or the most common sense thing to do, would be to test for that, and especially that I was displaying all the signs and symptoms of somebody who might be COVID-19 positive. Not to argue with them, a friend of mine then called at the minute that I was told I was being discharged. I was given the discharge summary, which had on it the prescription for the antibiotics. So I explained to my friend where I was. Now she reports when she walked through the reception, first she was told, "We don't have such a person in this place." And then she called me. As luck would have it, this was in a room where normally there wouldn't be any phone coverage, but the phone call came through. And she said, "I'm told you're not here. What hospital are you in?" And I said, "I'm in Huddersfield Royal Infirmary." And she said, "They say they don't have somebody like you. Do you have anything that you can look at which could identify where you are?" And I said, "The room has no window, has nothing, but on the bed I can see number 18. So if that means anything, that is where I am." So after a short time, she said, "Oh yes, they say they know exactly where you are. It is not number 18, but they do know where you are." So my friend reports that they told her that she can't come into the room unless she's properly aproned and masked and has gloves to come and see me. She didn't have a problem with that. And she was asking, "Okay, you are the medical staff. If you're afraid of approaching her, why are you exposing me to go and see her?" After some discussions between the medical staff, they decided she could come in. No, one of them decided she could come and get the prescription to hand over to my friend to go to the pharmacy. I had my back to one of the doors. A hand came through, and I was told, "Stretch your hand and hand over the prescription." Nothing like "please," nothing like "could you." I was told, "Stretch your hand and give me the prescription." I complied. So the prescription was taken away. I had read it, and the diagnosis was pneumonia. Went away. Then again, my friend reports she was told she can't take me away until I had a mask on my mouth. And I think by this time they had realized that I was having difficulty keeping the mask on. So what they decided to do, they told her this. She queried, "From what you're displaying, from what you're talking about, it seems as if my friend is very ill. Why are you discharging her?" And the reason she was given, they held up their hands and said, "Oh, but you're taking her home." So she was told she can't take me out until I have a mask. So she came to the door. Now she came to the other door facing me. I was left in a wheelchair all this time I was in hospital. So it was just going after 1 o'clock. She said, I've been told I can't take you out unless you have your mask on. I said, I have no problem with that. I put on the mask. She wheeled me out of the hospital. The doctors had said I should report at the reception and let them know that my friends had taken me away, so that they know that I'm no longer still in the hospital. So that is what we did as we passed the reception. I told my friend, this is what you need to do. Getting into the car, my friend asked me, what has the doctor told you? And I explained to her that you had my prescription. The diagnosis is that I have pneumonia. I would like a lift back to my house, please. And she queried and said, pneumonia? You should not even be being discharged from hospital. But since you're discharged from hospital, we can't take you to your house because then you can't look after yourself. So both her and her husband made a decision to take me to their house where they could be able to monitor and just ensure that I had the things that I needed to. So I went to their house on the 22nd of March. The first thing they did made me a cup of tea, struggled to have it down, and then took my medication. Was between resting and waking, resting and waking. They made me something to eat. By evening, I started to get a little bit of relief. The breathing had improved, but my normal talking voice was still not 100% there, but much better than I had felt in days. So went on recuperating. They left me on the ground floor, where there's a bathroom, there's a toilet. They have a big house. It's about a 6-bedroomed house, so I wasn't interfering with any other part of the house, which was very nice, the solitude and all. On the Thursday after this discharge, I get a call from my GP. When I got a call from the GP, my GP asked how I was doing, and I explained to her exactly what I've just told you from the 7th. I told her I was poorly, expressed to her how I felt a bit neglected and not really listened to when I was taken to hospital, discharged away with pneumonia, told I wasn't being tested for COVID-19, but I was on my way to recovery. And she asked me, what did the hospital say? What did the doctors at the hospital say? And I said, they said they diagnosed me with pneumonia. That is what the x-ray said. And she said, unfortunately, Stella, it's not only pneumonia you've got. You've tested positive for COVID-19. So I queried and asked at what stage did they decide to test for COVID-19, because they expressly told me that they was not going to test for COVID-19. So I found that it was sneaky. They went behind my back and did this. There was nothing strange. This is something that is going about. I do appreciate that information keep on changing from minute to minute and very, very rapidly. But it's nice to be told this is what we are going to do. So it was a surprise for me just to hear this news 4 days later after I had been discharged from hospital. So what the GP advised is that I should get in touch with anybody I had been in contact with. So this was from my cohort at the university, my friend and her family in London who had been to. Mercifully, I had not gone to the meeting at the parliament, so that was still a contained group. Then now my friends, who out of the goodness and kindness of their heart had taken me into their house. They have 3 children, so it is a family of 5. And one of the young men, who is a gym instructor, goes away and sometimes spends time with his girlfriend.